my name is Andy, and in this video I'm painting Avatar Aang, the last Airbender. Now, funny story, the image you saw in the intro does not exist anymore because shortly after that point I completely ruined this painting. Long story short, I put a layer of retouch varnish on the finished painting with the idea that I would paint over it with a new layer just to add more details, and I did that, and then I applied another layer of retouch varnish, but that retouch varnish wiped out the new layer and caused more problems, and I tried to wipe that off, but I also wiped off then the first layer on which I used retouch varnish, and so on and so on. It cascaded and it was a complete disaster, which is a shame because I had a new frame especially for this painting, a nice blue one, but I'm not gonna be able to use it. Anyway, lessons learned, and now let's get back to the video. Right now I'm just laying down a foundation with thinned out paint, and this time I'm using turpentine, not white spirit. I heard that white spirit may leave a film after it dries, so I panicked and I switched to turpentine. And this is about as far as I'm gonna take the first pass. And this is my palette I'm currently using, except for the ultramarine blue. I actually didn't use that, I used Ivory Black. Right now I'm laying down the form pass, and I'm just using paint as it comes out of the tube, so no thinners anymore. Now as I turned on the camera, I seemingly had turned off my brain, and by that I mean I didn't conceptualize a lot, so I just sorta painted what I saw and I didn't add any more information than was there. So normally I'm thinking about the skin color and the source of the light. It's hitting a warm skin tone. That skin tone is going to become more yellow as you move on to the brighter areas, and it's going to become more reddish as you move into the shadow areas. So values are shifting, hues are shifting, and usually I think about all those things, and in this painting I mostly didn't. I am thinking about edge control though, so I didn't want the eyes to have razor sharp edges, so I somewhat managed to do that. But mostly I was thinking about my disk space and how this video will be received, and is this gonna get me 1,000,000 subs, you know, just all that external stuff. And the camera was in my line of sight and it bothered me, and just everything became so troublesome for me. And it didn't bother me as much when I was painting the apples, but when it's a portrait, you know, it has to be exact, it has to be correct, it has to resemble the person. There's just not much room for error there, so hence more pressure. Painting this arrow was kind of fun. I mean, it's unusual, not many people have huge blue arrows on their heads. And here I'm trying to get rid of those crispy edges, although around the head it's still quite crispy. So in order to get some realism here, it's important to note that this arrow isn't just one color, it's just like the other parts, shifting hues and shifting values. And in this case my brain reactivated, and as you can see above his eyebrow there's this muscle that's catching some light, and it's very subtle, so here I didn't overdo it. Here's a close-up of my hat, and we're back. Now one thing I'm doing here is using a very tiny brush to cover a relatively large area, and that became somewhat of a problem because as this paint dried, the edges, they hardened, so all these smooth blends kind of went to waste. I don't know if it's that or because of the mal-preparation of the surface. Anyway, the blends weren't what they're supposed to be, and that kind of frustrated the hell out of me. So for my next portrait I'm gonna work on a linen canvas, extra fine grain, and use bigger brushes or use a grisaille or something that works with opaque paints, and hopefully I will not have this problem again. I've been struggling with painting surfaces since last year, because at first I was painting on these heavy oil painting papers, and they had fine grain which allowed for good details and good blending. Then I thought, well, it's not very archival, so I'm gonna switch to linen canvas on a frame, you know, stretched canvas. But I wasn't really aware of the differences between canvases, whatever. I ordered medium grain, so it wasn't extra fine tooth or fine tooth. And yeah, so I ended up working on that surface, but it wasn't ideal. And by that I mean not ideal for my technique or my the result I had in mind. Painting this eyebrow was a bit of a struggle. Once again, I was all over the place, and I also struggled a lot with blending it into the existing paint from the previous session. In order to do that successfully, you need to match the color of the paint you laid down earlier, and also it helps if you oil in the surface a bit, because otherwise you get these crisp edges because you're basically dry brushing in the new paint. Also, there's a lot of contrast now between the old layers and the new layer, because the old layer's already sunk in quite quickly. It's almost just a day later and it was already like this, so you can clearly see a big difference between the eye I'm painting now and the eye on the left here. And technically that shouldn't be happening because I'm working on an oil primed surface, or it should be happening less than working on a gessoed surface, or maybe the underpainting has too much oil. I don't know. Now, the reason I'm painting Avatar Aang is because I was watching the live action show, the new show, and this image popped up, and I was struck by the color, so I pressed pause and took a screenshot. And I thought, wow, wouldn't this make an amazing painting? You've got this blue arrow and then this complementary color orange in his face and in his clothes, and if you combine that with a blue frame, it's gonna be amazing. And I still had the blue that was used for this frame, so perfect. And of course, next to the color combinations that struck me, I also love the subject matter. And even though I binge watched the series, I still love the animated series much more. I mean, the production of the live series is amazing, especially that scene where Aang fuses with the water spirit. By the way, right now I'm blocking in the rest of the layer because I'm all out of blocked in layer. So this is once again turpentine with paint out of the tube. Oh, and here I am painting. Looking at the reference, I am a real boy, just like Gordon, or should we say Aang. So yeah, amazing production value, but it didn't capture the magic I felt when I was first watching the animated series. In fact, I went back and rewatched the animated series. Actually, I'm in season 2 now, and I still love it. In fact, I remember after completing the series that me and my ex-girlfriend, we took a piece of paper and we wrote down all the things that made this story and this animated series so amazing. I think back then I still had sort of an ambition to one day make a story like that. I'm not really sure. But I did want to know, what makes this tick, what makes it great, and just learn from it. And eventually I did make a story, but it was nothing like Avatar. It was a children's book actually. And I never got around to publishing it, so it's still on my hard drive somewhere. Oh, and in the meantime, we're doing the form layer, the form pass, on the underpainting of the ear. Oh, and something that I should really take into consideration is using multiple brushes, because I'm always using the same brush to do light areas and dark areas, and that creates kind of a mess sometimes. The worst is when you don't have a method and you just paint all over the place, going from something super dark and then taking that same brush and dipping it into a lighter value and try to paint that light area, and things get messy eventually, muddy colors. And you can kind of fix that if you have a high chroma color on your palette. For example, I have that Cadmium Orange, and that's super dominant. You just need a tiny bit into the mix, and if you're not careful, the whole mix will be orange again. Meanwhile, we have crossed the 10-minute barrier of this video. If you are still here, thank you so much for watching. And if you would be so kind to subscribe, that would be amazing. Or just like the video or leave a comment. I know it's not very sexy to trash your own work, but I'm gonna do it anyway, just a little bit. I'm just not happy with the entire dark side of his face. There's too much saturation, and that thing, that crease next to his nose, the really, reddish, magenta, rose thing, it's just too much, and it makes him look like he's 312 years old instead of 112. And I couldn't go on like that for another hour, but I won't. Now it's finally time to add some background. Which reminds me, I need to get one of those big makeup brushes. Those big round fat brushes. I heard they're really good to blend out the background. Which is what I would do next time, because now I'm sort of regretting treating it as an afterthought. And the reason I didn't paint the whole thing, the whole underpainting in one go, is because I really wanted to move on from area to area. So I wanted to have one area look really, almost finished, and then I would move on and finish this new area and then move on again. That didn't really happen though. I got a little impatient. And over here I have created bands of color, and then later on I just blend them together as I am doing now. And that was one of the rare moments I used my brain. And here we have some B-roll of me mixing on my palette, and it's back to the painting. Now for this video I created background music in Studio One, but I didn't use it in the end because the music was too much. You couldn't hear me talk properly. It was just too annoying, basically. But I did keep the intro and the final presentation music of this painting, which will be at the end. Now you might be wondering, why is this video so long? Was that really necessary? And I'll tell you why. Because I want you to feel the pain I felt while creating this. I want you to have that, is this ever gonna end feeling? These greens in the background really make the foreground come to life. It's just complementary color. So now I am retouch varnishing the foreground, so just the figure and not the background, because I finished it the day before. And if you were to go over it right now, it would get messy. I mean, everything would be smudged all over the place and the background would be gone basically. And now I'm going to use liquid for the first time, and that will speed up the drying process of the next layers. And I'm also introducing a bit of oil into the mix, but not a lot. So not a lot of liquid, not a lot of oil, just a tiny bit. And it also helps to oil in the retouched varnished surface, because otherwise it gets kind of coarse and it's kind of rough to blend the new paint. So the retouch varnish brings back all the contrast and all the vibrancy in the colors, while also protecting the layers below. So that means I can now apply a glaze, and if I make a mistake I can simply wipe it off without contaminating the previous layer. Unfortunately, all this turned out to be a pipe dream, as I mentioned before at the beginning of this video. The entire painting was destroyed, probably because the paint didn't adhere well. The new layer didn't adhere well to the retouched varnished layer, and it couldn't withstand another layer of retouch varnish. So guys, thanks so much for watching. This entire project has been a disaster, but I just wanted to put it out there anyway. Not everything can be great, and now I just want to move on with my life and start a new project. So thank you very much, and see you next time.